Bikers messed with an old, disabled veteran. 20 minutes later, Navy SEALs showed up. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Murphy's Diner on Highway 67, a place where truckers, travelers, and locals have been stopping for coffee and pie since 1962. What happened there on October 15th, 2023, will become the most talked-about incident in the small town of Cedar Falls for decades to come. At exactly 2:47 p.m., a weathered blue pickup truck with hand decap plates pulled into the parking space closest to the diner's entrance. The driver took his time getting out, a man in his 70s with silver hair, wearing a faded Navy baseball cap and a jacket that had seen better days. His right leg was clearly artificial, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to navigate the world despite physical limitations. Master Chief Petty Officer, retired, Samuel Sam Rodriguez had been driving the same route every Sunday for 3 years, ever since his wife Maria passed away from cancer. The weekly trip to Murphy's Diner wasn't just about the coffee. It was about maintaining some semblance of routine in a life that had been turned upside down by loss and loneliness. Sam had served 28 years in the Navy, including 4 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan as a Navy SEAL. He'd earned a Purple Heart when an IED took his right leg below the knee during his final tour, but he'd never let the injury define him. Even at 73, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had served his country with distinction. What Sam didn't know as he limped toward the diner's entrance was that 12 members of the Devil's Disciples Motorcycle Club had been drinking at Murphy's for the past 2 hours, celebrating their president's birthday with increasingly loud and obnoxious behavior. The club wasn't your typical weekend warrior group. These were hardcore criminals with a reputation for violence, drug dealing, and intimidation. The moment Sam walked through the door, the atmosphere in the diner changed. Chapter 1, The Confrontation. Well, sneered Jake Viper Morrison, the club sergeant-at-arms, as he noticed Sam make his way to his usual booth in the corner. Look what we got here, boys. A genuine American hero. The sarcasm in Viper's voice was unmistakable. At 6 feet 4 inches and 280 pounds, with arms covered in tattoos depicting skulls, snakes, and various obscenities, he was an intimidating presence even when sober. After 2 hours of drinking, he was looking for trouble. Sam ignored the comment and continued to his booth, where waitress Betty Martinez, a 45-year-old mother of 3 who had been working at Murphy's for 15 years, was already approaching with a pot of coffee. "The usual, Sam?" Betty asked with a warm smile, trying to ignore the tension that had suddenly filled the room. "That'd be great, Betty. Thanks." But Viper wasn't done. He stood up from his table, swaying slightly, and approached Sam's booth with 5 of his club brothers behind him. "I'm talking to you, old man," Viper said, now standing directly beside Sam's table. "Don't you know it's polite to acknowledge your betters when they're speaking to you?" Sam looked up calmly. At 73, he had no interest in confrontation, especially not with drunk bikers who were clearly looking for a fight. "I don't want any trouble, son. Just try to enjoy my coffee." "Son," Viper laughed harshly. "You hear that, boys? Grandpa here thinks I'm his son. Maybe you should show some respect for your elders, right, old-timer?" The other club members laughed and moved closer. The diner's other customers, a family with 2 young children and an elderly couple, quickly paid their bills and left. Even the cook, Miguel Santos, peered out from the kitchen with concern. Betty stepped forward bravely. "Gentlemen, please. This is a family establishment. There's no need for any trouble here." "Shut up, lady," snarled Tommy Blade Carter, the club's vice president. "This is between us and Captain America here." Sam's jaw tightened slightly at the disrespect shown to Betty, but he remained calm. "I'll finish my coffee and be on my way. No need for this to escalate." But escalation was exactly what Viper had in mind. He reached over and knocked Sam's coffee cup off the table, sending the hot liquid splashing across Sam's jacket and lap. "Oops," Viper said with mock concern. "Looks like you had a little accident there, hero. Maybe you need some help cleaning up." That's when Viper made his biggest mistake. He grabbed Sam's Navy cap off his head and threw it on the floor. "Let's see what's under this piece of military garbage," Viper taunted, grinding the cap under his boot. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Sam's eyes, which had been patient and calm, suddenly turned ice cold. Betty, who had known Sam for 3 years, had never seen this expression on his face before. "Pick it up," Sam said quietly. "What did you say to me, old man?" "I said pick it up." Sam's voice remained quiet, but there was something in his tone that made even the drunk bikers pause for a moment. Viper laughed, but it sounded forced now. "Or what? You're going to fight all 12 of us with your one good leg." That's when Sam did something unexpected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone. With calm deliberation, he scrolled through his contacts and selected a number. "What are you doing? Calling the cops." Blade taunted. "They won't get here for 20 minutes, and will be long gone after we teach you some manners." Sam put the phone to his ear and waited for someone to answer. When they did, his next words changed everything. "This is Trident 7 Alpha," Sam said, using his old SEAL call sign. "I need immediate assistance at Murphy's Diner on Highway 67. Multiple hostile targets harassing civilian population. Authorization Bravo 997. Viper and his crew looked confused. They had no idea what Sam had just done, but something about the way he had spoken, the sudden return of military bearing, the use of code words and tactical language, made them uneasy. 20 minutes, Sam said calmly, closing his phone. "That's how long you have to decide how you want this to end." Chapter 2, the call goes out. What the Devil's Disciples didn't know was that Sam's phone call had been answered by Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, duty officer at Naval Special Warfare Command's Emergency Response Center. The authorization code Sam had used was legitimate, a rarely activated protocol that allowed retired Special Operations personnel to request immediate assistance when they or civilians were under threat from hostile forces. Within 60 seconds of Sam's call, Chen had verified his identity and service record. Master Chief Samuel Rodriguez, Navy SEAL Team 3, 28 years of service, Purple Heart recipient, retired with full honors. The authorization was valid. "Sir, I'm showing a location as approximately 40 minutes from Naval Air Station Oceana," Chen informed Sam during a callback. "I have assets that can respond faster. What's your tactical situation?" 12 hostiles, intoxicated, escalating aggression toward civilian population. Request minimum necessary force to de-escalate. Sam responded, still using military terminology, while the bikers watched with growing confusion and unease. "Copy that, Trident 7 Alpha. Help is on the way." What Chen didn't mention was that Team 6 was conducting training exercises just 15 minutes away from Cedar Falls. When she contacted their team leader, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reaper Thompson, he didn't hesitate. "Pack it up, gentlemen." Thompson announced his 8-man squad. "We have a real-world situation. One of our brothers needs assistance." Within 3 minutes, 2 unmarked black SUVs were racing toward Murphy's Diner, carrying 8 of the Navy's most elite warriors. Chapter 3, The Waiting Game. Back at the diner, the standoff continued. Viper and his crew had initially laughed off Sam's phone call, assuming he was bluffing or calling local police. But as the minutes ticked by, something about Sam's calm confidence began to unnerve them. "You know what, old man," Viper said, "try to regain control of the situation. I'm getting tired of your games." He reached down and grabbed Sam by the front of his shirt, pulling him partially out of the booth. Sam didn't resist, but his eyes never left Viper's face. "Last chance," Sam said quietly. "Walk away now and this ends here." "Or what?" Viper snarled, pulling Sam closer. "Your imaginary friends are going to come save you?" That's when Betty, who had been watching in horror, decided she couldn't stand by any longer. She grabbed the baseball bat that Miguel kept behind the counter for protection and stepped forward. "Let him go," she shouted. "He's a good man. He tips well, he's polite to everyone, and he served his country. Leave him alone." Blade turned toward Betty, with a cruel smile. "Well, look at that. The waitress has some fight in her. Maybe after we're done with Captain America here, we'll show you some attention, too." The implied threat against Betty was the last straw for Sam. Despite being held by Viper, despite being outnumbered 12-1, despite his artificial leg, in his 73 years, Sam's training kicked in one fluid motion. He broke Viper's grip, spun around, and delivered a precise strike to the big man's solar plexus. Viper doubled over, gasping for air, completely unprepared for the speed and power of the attack. "Nobody threatens the lady," Sam said calmly, stepping back into a defensive stance that any military combative's instructor would have recognized immediately. The other 11 bikers surged forward, but Sam was ready. Age and physical limitations couldn't erase nearly 3 decades of the world's most elite military training. He moved with economy and precision, using their numbers against them in the confined space of the diner. But he was still one elderly man with one good leg against 11 younger, larger opponents. Within a minute, they had him on the ground, kicking and punching with the vicious enthusiasm of men who enjoyed inflicting pain. Betty screamed and tried to help, but Blade grabbed the bat away from her and shoved her against the wall. Miguel called 911 from the kitchen, but everyone knew local law enforcement was still 15 minutes away. That's when they heard the sound of vehicles pulling into the parking lot at high speed. Chapter 4. The Cavalry Arrives. The sound of car doors slamming made everyone freeze. Through the diner's windows, they could see 2 black SUVs parked at aggressive angles, and 8 figures in tactical gear moving toward the entrance with practiced precision. Viper, who was still catching his breath from Sam's punch, looked toward the door with growing alarm. "Who the hell is that?" His question was answered when the diner's door burst open, and Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson stepped inside, followed by 7 other Navy SEALs in full tactical gear. They moved like predators, spreading out to control the space with fluid, deadly efficiency. "United States Navy," Thompson announced in a voice that carried absolute authority. Everyone on the ground, hands visible now. The bikers looked around uncertainly. They outnumbered the newcomers, but something about the way these men moved, the way they carried themselves, the obvious competence and training, made even the most hardened criminals among them hesitate. "I said now." Thompson's voice cracked like a whip. 11 of the 12 bikers immediately dropped to the ground. Only Viper remained standing, his pride and alcohol-fueled bravado overriding his survival instincts. "You got no authority here," Viper snarled. "This is civilian territory." Thompson walked slowly toward Viper, his eyes never leaving the big man's face. At 6 feet 2 inches and 220 pounds of lean muscle, Thompson was smaller than Viper, but everything about his presence radiated lethal competence. "That man you were assaulting," Thompson said quietly, nodding toward Sam, who was slowly getting to his feet with Betty's help. "Master Chief Samuel Rodriguez, Navy SEAL, Purple Heart recipient. 28 years of service protecting people like you from enemies you can't even imagine." Thompson was now standing directly in front of Viper, close enough that the biker could smell the gun oil and tactical gear. "He called us," Thompson continued. "Use an emergency protocol reserved for situations where American heroes are under attack. And we came, all the way from a training exercise 15 minutes away. We dropped everything and came, because that's what we do for our brothers." Viper's bravado was starting to crumble, but he made one last attempt to save face. He started it, threw the first punch. "After you assaulted him, threatened a civilian woman, and desecrated military insignia," said Chief Petty Officer David Hawk Martinez, Thompson second in command. "We saw the whole thing through the windows before we came in." That was a lie. They had arrived too late to see the beginning of the confrontation, but it had the desired effect. Viper's face went pale as he realized that not only was he outnumbered by elite military personnel, but they had him on multiple felony charges. "Last chance," Thompson said calmly. "Get on the ground, or we'll put you there." Viper looked around at his crew, all of whom were already face down on the floor with their hands behind their heads. He looked at the 8 Navy SEALs, each one standing in a position that would allow them to respond to any threat with overwhelming force. Finally, his survival instincts overcame his pride, and he slowly lowered himself to the ground. Chapter 5, The Brotherhood. While Thompson's team secured the bikers, Chief Martinez approached Sam, who was sitting in his booth dabbing blood from a split lip with a napkin Betty had brought him. "Master Chief Rodriguez?" Martinez said respectfully. "I'm Chief Martinez, Team 6. Are you injured, sir?" Sam looked up at the younger SEAL and managed a small smile. "Nothing that won't heal, Chief. Thank you for responding so quickly. Sir, with respect, we don't leave our brothers behind. Ever. Whether it's on the battlefield or in a diner in small-town America." Martinez knelt down to examine Sam's injuries more closely. The old SEAL had taken a beating. His face was bruised, his ribs were sore, and his artificial leg had been knocked askew during the fight, but his eyes were clear and alert. "Medical?" Martinez asked. "I'll be fine. More worried about Betty here." Sam nodded toward the waitress, who was shaking from the adrenaline and fear of the confrontation. They threatened her. Thompson, who had been monitoring the conversation while his team zip-tied the bikers, approached the booth. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Commander Thompson. Are you injured?" Betty shook her head, still trembling. "No, I'm okay. They just scared me. But Sam, Mr. Rodriguez, he tried to protect me. Even though there were 12 of them, he stood up to them when they threatened me." Thompson nodded and turned back to Sam. "Master Chief, we're going to need a statement for our report. But first, let me ask, do you want to press charges?" Sam looked around the diner at the 11 bikers lying on the floor in zip ties, then at the 8 elite warriors who had dropped everything to come to his aid, then at Betty, who, despite her fear, was already cleaning up the mess from the overturned coffee. "What I want," Sam said slowly, "is for these men to understand something about respect. About what it means to serve others instead of just serving yourself. About how a community is supposed to work." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Sir," Sam struggled to his feet, waving off Martinez's offer of assistance. Despite his injuries, he walked over to where Viper lay face down on the floor. "Look at me," Sam commanded. Viper turned his head to look up at the old veteran he had been tormenting just minutes earlier. "I'm not going to press charges," Sam said quietly. "Not because you don't deserve it, but because I believe in second chances. Because I believe people can change if someone shows them a better way." Viper's expression shifted from defiance to confusion. This wasn't what he had expected. "But," Sam continued, "there are conditions. You and your club are going to come back here next Sunday. You're going to apologize to Betty, to Miguel, and to every customer whose meal you ruined today. You're going to pay for the damages. And you're going to listen while I tell you some stories about what real brotherhood looks like." Thompson and his team exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual outcome of a situation like this, but they recognized the wisdom in what the old Master Chief was trying to do. "And if you don't show up," Martinez added helpfully, "we'll come find you. All of us. And next time, we might not be in such a forgiving mood." Chapter 6, The Education. The following Sunday, something unprecedented happened at Murphy's Diner. At exactly 2 p.m., 12 Harley-Davidsons pulled into the parking lot, followed by 2 black SUVs. The Devil's Disciples had returned as promised, but they weren't alone. Lieutenant Commander Thompson and his team had decided to attend this unusual gathering as well. Betty watched nervously from behind the counter as the bikers filed into the diner, their swagger noticeably diminished from the previous week. Viper led the group, carrying an envelope thick with cash and wearing an expression that suggested he was deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. Sam was already sitting in his usual booth, his navy cap back on his head, and a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. The bruises on his face had faded to yellow and purple, and his split lip was healing nicely. Betty, Viper said awkwardly, approaching the counter. We want to apologize for last week. What we did was wrong. We threatened you. We scared your customers. And we showed disrespect to a man who deserved better. Betty nodded cautiously. Thank you for saying that. Viper handed her the envelope. This should cover the damages and lost business from last week. If it's not enough, just let us know. One by one, each member of the Devil's Disciples offered their apologies to Betty, to Miguel, and to Sam. Some were clearly more sincere than others, but all of them seemed genuinely subdued by the experience of being utterly dominated by 8 professional warriors. When the apologies were finished, Sam gestured for the bikers to sit down. Thompson and his SEALs took a table nearby, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to allow the conversation to proceed naturally. I want to tell you about Brotherhood, Sam began, his voice carrying easily through the quiet diner. Real brotherhood. Not the kind where you intimidate people weaker than you, but the kind where you protect people who can't protect themselves. For the next 2 hours, Sam told stories. He talked about his SEAL training, where men push themselves to their absolute limits, not for personal glory, but become worthy of the trust their teammates would place in them in combat. He described missions where SEALs had risked their lives to save complete strangers, simply because it was the right thing to do. He told them about Maria, his wife of 45 years, who had stood by him through 4 combat deployments, through the rehabilitation after he lost his leg, through the nightmares and the survivor's guilt that came with outliving so many good friends. She used to say that strength isn't about how much damage you can do, Sam said quietly. It's about how much good you can do, how many people you can help, how many lives you can make better instead of worse. Some of the bikers shifted uncomfortably, but they were listening. Even Viper seemed genuinely engaged with the stories. Last week, you asked me about my imaginary friends, Sam continued, nodding toward Thompson's table. Let me tell you about friendship, about loyalty, about what happens when you earn the respect of truly honorable men. He told them about the emergency protocol he had used, about how 8 elite warriors had dropped everything to help a brother in need, about how Thompson's team hadn't asked for payment, hadn't asked for recognition, hadn't even asked for thanks. They had simply done what needed to be done, because it was their duty to protect those who had served before them. That's what real strength looks like, Sam concluded. Not 12 men beating up one old cripple in a diner, but 8 men willing to risk their careers and their freedom to protect someone who needed help. Chapter 7, The Transformation. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Murphy's Diner had ever witnessed. What started as a tense confrontation between criminals and law enforcement gradually transformed into something resembling a group therapy session. Viper, whose real name turned out to be Jake Morrison, had been a Marine corporal before he got involved with the motorcycle club. He had served 2 tours in Iraq and come home with PTSD, anger issues, and a drinking problem that had cost him his marriage and his relationship with his children. I used to be proud of my service, Jake admitted, staring down at his hands. But when I got home, nobody seemed to care. The VA was a nightmare. My wife left me, and I couldn't hold down a job. The club was the only place where I felt like I belonged. Several other members had similar stories. Men who had served their country honorably, only to struggle with the transition back to civilian life. Men who had found belonging and purpose in a criminal organization because they couldn't find it anywhere else. We've been doing everything wrong, said Tommy Carter, the club's vice president. Using fear instead of earning respect. Taking from people instead of protecting them. Thompson, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. It's not too late to change. But change requires action, not just words. What kind of action? Jake asked. Sam and Thompson exchanged a look, and Sam nodded slightly. There's a veterans shelter in the city that needs security volunteers, Thompson said. Men who understand what combat veterans are going through. Men who can provide protection and guidance without judgment. We also need volunteers for a program that helps military families during deployments, added Chief Martinez. Guys who can fix motorcycles, do yard work, help with transportation when the primary breadwinner is overseas. Jake looked around at his club members, seeing something in their faces that hadn't been there in years. Hope. "What would we have to do?" he asked. "Start by proving you're serious," Sam said. "Complete a community service program. Get clean and sober. Learn to channel that loyalty and brotherhood toward helping people instead of hurting them. And if we do all that," Thompson smiled for the first time since entering the diner, "then maybe we can find you some real missions. The kind that actually matter." Chapter 8. The Proof. Over the next 6 months, something remarkable happened in Cedar Falls. The Devil's Disciples Motorcycle Club underwent a transformation that nobody would believe possible. Jake Morrison was the first to complete an alcohol treatment program, followed by anger management counseling and veteran-specific therapy for PTSD. One by one, his club brothers followed suit, supporting each other through the difficult process of confronting their demons and changing their lives. They started small: community cleanup projects, volunteering at the local food bank, providing security for church events and school functions. Slowly, the people of Cedar Falls began to see them not as threats, but as neighbors trying to make amends for their past behavior. Sam became their unofficial mentor, meeting with them every Sunday at Murphy's Diner to discuss their progress and offer guidance. Thompson and his team checked in regularly, providing additional support and resources when needed. The breakthrough came when Jake received a phone call that changed everything. His ex-wife, Sarah, contacted him for the first time in 3 years. Their teenage son, Michael, was struggling with depression and had been making comments about not wanting to live anymore. "I don't know what else to do," Sarah said through tears. "He won't talk to counselors. He won't talk to me, and he's getting worse. But he still has your picture on his desk, and sometimes I catch him looking at old videos of you on your motorcycle." Jake didn't hesitate. Within an hour, he was on his way to see the son he hadn't spoken to in years, terrified of what he might find but determined to help. What he found was a 16-year-old boy who had inherited his father's sense of honor and duty, but had also inherited his struggles with depression and feelings of worthlessness. Michael had been bullied at school, was struggling academically, and felt like he didn't belong anywhere. "I used to be proud that my dad was a Marine," Michael said quietly during their first conversation in years. "But then you became a criminal, and I didn't know what to think about myself anymore." Jake's heart broke as he realized how his choices had affected his son. But instead of wallowing in guilt, he chose action. "Son, I made terrible mistakes. I let my pain and anger turn me into someone I'm not proud of. But I'm trying to change, and I want you to be part of that change." Over the next few weeks, Jake introduced Michael to Sam, to Thompson and his SEALs, and to the community service work the Reformed Motorcycle Club was doing. He showed his son what real strength looked like, what real brotherhood meant, and what it looked like to serve others instead of serving only yourself. The change in Michael was dramatic. Working alongside veterans who had overcome their own struggles, contributing to projects that helped other people, and seeing his father transform from a criminal into a community leader gave the teenager something he had been desperately missing: purpose and belonging. Chapter 9. The Mission. The real test came in month 7, when Thompson contacted Jake with an unusual request. "We've got a situation," Thompson explained during one of their Sunday meetings at Murphy's. "Military family in crisis. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez is deployed in Syria. Her husband was killed in a car accident last month, leaving her 3 kids with their elderly grandmother, who's now in the hospital with a heart attack. What do they need?" Jake asked immediately. "Everything. Transportation to and from school, help with groceries and household maintenance, someone to be there when the kids are scared or upset. Child services want to put them in foster care until their mother can get emergency leave, but that could take weeks." Sam leaned forward. "What's the timeline?" "Grandmother goes into surgery tomorrow morning. If there's no family support system in place, the kids get taken into custody tomorrow afternoon. Jake looked around at his club members, seeing the same determination in their faces that he felt in his chest. This was what they had been preparing for. This was their chance to prove that they had truly changed. "We'll handle it," Jake said simply. What followed was 72 hours of the most intense community service any of them had ever experienced. The reformed Devil's Disciples mobilized like a military unit, with Jake coordinating logistics, Tommy handling transportation, and other members taking shifts to ensure the children were never alone. They grocery shopped, cooked meals, helped with homework, and provided the kind of stable, protective presence that the frightened children desperately needed. When 8-year-old Sophia had nightmares about her father's death, it was club member Carlos Rivera, a former Army medic who had lost his own father at a young age, who sat with her until she fell back asleep. When 12-year-old Miguel got into a fight at school with bullies who were taunting him about his family situation, it was Tommy Carter who showed up to pick him up, had a quiet conversation with the school principal, and then taught Miguel some basic self-defense techniques that emphasized protection over aggression. And when 16-year-old Isabella started talking about dropping out of school to get a job and help support the family, it was Jake who sat her down and explained that the best way to honor her father's memory was to pursue her education and build a future that would make him proud. Chapter 10, The Recognition. The story of the Devil's Disciples' transformation might have remained a local footnote, but 3 things happened that brought it to national attention. First, Sergeant Gonzalez was granted emergency leave and returned home to find her children not only safe and well cared for, but thriving under protection of people she had never met. Her tearful reunion with her kids, captured on video by a local news crew, went viral within hours. Second, the elderly grandmother made a full recovery from her heart surgery and insisted on holding a press conference to thank the angels in leather jackets who had saved her family. Her emotional testimony about how former criminals had become heroes captured the attention of national media outlets. Third, Lieutenant Commander Thompson submitted an official report to Naval Special Warfare Command documenting the entire incident, from the original confrontation at Murphy's Diner through the successful completion of the family support mission. The report made its way up the chain of command to the Secretary of the Navy, who decided that this story needed to be shared. The ceremony was held at Murphy's Diner, of course. Secretary of the Navy Carlos Del Toro flew in personally to present awards to Sam, the Thompson SEAL team, and to the reformed Devil's Disciples. "Today we recognize something extraordinary," Secretary Del Toro said as news cameras rolled. "We recognize the power of redemption, the importance of second chances, and the truth that Brotherhood knows no boundaries." Sam received a civilian medal for his role in de-escalating the original confrontation and mentoring the motorcycle club through their transformation. Thompson and his team received commendations for their rapid response and continued support of veteran rehabilitation efforts. But the moment that brought tears to every eye in the room came when Jake Morrison stepped forward to receive his award. Jake Morrison, Secretary Del Toro said formally, former Marine Corporal, now president of the Devil's Disciples Community Service Organization, for exceptional dedication to supporting military families and demonstrating that true strength lies in service to others. As Jake accepted his medal, his son Michael stood with his mother in the crowd, beaming with pride at the man his father had become. Chapter 11, The Legacy. 2 years later, the Devil's Disciples Community Service Organization had grown from 12 reformed criminals to over 50 volunteers across 3 states. They had helped dozens of military families through crises, provided security for community events, and established a scholarship fund for children of fallen service members. Murphy's Diner had become an unofficial headquarters for their operations, with Betty Martinez, she had married Miguel the cook, serving as their administrative coordinator. The diner's walls were covered with letters of thanks from families they had helped, photographs from community events, and a special display case containing Sam's Navy medals alongside the civilian awards received by the Reformed Motorcycle Club. Sam, now 75, continued to serve as their mentor and spiritual leader. His health was declining. The years of military service and the injuries from combat were taking their toll, but his commitment to the organization never wavered. You know what I'm most proud of? Sam said during one of their Sunday meetings. It's not that you change your lives, though that's remarkable. It's that you're changing other lives. You're proving that redemption is possible, that people can grow beyond their mistakes, and that service to others is the highest calling. Jake, now 2 years sober and reconciled with his family, had become a sought-after speaker at military bases and veterans events across the country. His message was simple but powerful. It's never too late to choose honor over anger, service over selfishness, and brotherhood over isolation. Thompson, who had been promoted to commander and was now leading a new Navy program that connected active duty personnel with veteran support organizations, considered the Devil's Disciples Project one of his most successful missions. What we learned, Thompson said in an interview with Military Times, is that sometimes the best way to serve your country is to help your fellow veterans find their way back to the values that made them serve in the first place. Chapter 12, The Circle. The end of the story came, as many important stories do, with a beginning. Sam Rodriguez passed away peacefully in his sleep on a Sunday morning in March, exactly 3 years after the confrontation at Murphy's Diner that had started everything. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. SEALs from his old unit, members of the Devil's Disciples organization, military families they had helped, and ordinary citizens of Cedar Falls who had learned to see past stereotypes and recognize the potential for good in everyone. Jake Morrison delivered the eulogy, speaking about the man who had taught him that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. As he spoke, Jake's son Michael sat in the front row wearing his father's old Marine dress uniform, having enlisted the previous month with plans to become a Navy SEAL himself. Sam Rodriguez saved my life, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. Not just from those bikers who were beating me up that day, though he did that too, but from the man I was becoming. He showed me that it's never too late to choose a better path, never too late to serve something greater than yourself, and never too late to become the kind of person you always wished you could be. After the service, as the mourners gathered outside the church, Commander Thompson approached Jake with a proposal that would have seemed impossible 4 years earlier. Jake, I've got a job offer for you. The Navy wants to establish a new program pairing retired SEALs with community organizations that support military families. We need someone to run the program. Someone who understands what it's like to lose your way and find it again. Someone who knows how to build real brotherhood. Jake looked around at his club members, men who had transformed from criminals into community leaders, from threats into protectors, from outcasts into heroes. He thought about Sam, who had seen potential in them when nobody else could. He thought about his son, who was now proud to carry on the family tradition of military service. When do I start? Jake asked. Epilogue, the ripple effect. 5 years after 12 bikers messed with an old disabled veteran in a small-town diner, the ripple effects of that confrontation were still spreading across the country. Murphy's Diner had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, with veterans from around the world stopping by to see where the miracle had happened. Betty and Miguel had expanded the restaurant and turned part of it into a museum dedicated to veteran rehabilitation and community service. The Devil's Disciples Community Service Organization had chapters in 15 states and had helped over 500 military families through various crises. Their model of using reformed criminals to provide community support had been adopted by law enforcement agencies nationwide as an alternative to traditional incarceration. Jake Morrison, now director of the Navy's Community Integration Program, had become one of the most respected voices in veteran rehabilitation circles. His autobiography, From Devil to Disciple, How a Navy SEAL Saved My Soul, had become required reading at military leadership schools. His son Michael had graduated from SEAL training with honors and was currently serving with Team 3, the same unit his grandfather figure Sam Rodriguez had served with decades earlier. The young man carried a photo of Sam in his gear, along with his father's original Devil's Disciples patch as a reminder of how far his family had come. Commander Thompson, now a Navy captain, had used the lessons learned from the Devil's Disciples Project to establish similar programs around the world. Military bases in Japan, Germany, and South Korea now had community service organizations run by reformed criminals who had been given second chances to serve their countries in positive ways. Betty Martinez had written her own book about the experience, titled Coffee, Courage, and Second Chances: What I Learned Serving Heroes. The proceeds funded scholarships for children of military families, administered to the Sam Rodriguez Memorial Foundation. But perhaps the most important legacy of that October afternoon was something that couldn't be measured in statistics or awards: the understanding that redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of changing their life. The last entry in Sam Rodriguez's personal journal, found after his death, captured the essence of what had happened at Murphy's Diner. Today I learned something important. Sometimes the people who look most like enemies are actually just allies who haven't found their mission yet. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see past the anger and fear to the hurt underneath. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your opponent. It's helping to become the person they always had the potential to be. The journal entry was dated October 15th, 2023. The day 12 bikers messed with an old disabled veteran and discovered that some fights are worth having, some people are worth saving, and some transformations are worth a lifetime of service. Every Sunday at 2:47 p.m., Jake Morrison still pulls into the parking space closest to Murphy's Diner entrance. He orders coffee, sits in Sam's old booth, and spends time mentoring the next group of lost souls who need to find their way back to honor. Because he learned from a Navy SEAL that real brotherhood isn't about who you're willing to fight. It's about who you're willing to save. And sometimes, when the afternoon light hits the diner windows just right, visitors swear they can still see an old man in a Navy cap sitting in the corner booth, smiling as he watches former enemies become family. The plaque beside the door reads, Murphy's Diner, where second chances are always on a menu, established 1962, transformed 2023. Below it, in smaller letters, is Sam Rodriguez's favorite saying: strength isn't about how much damage you can do. It's about how much good you can do. 20 bikers had messed with an old disabled veteran one October afternoon. 20 minutes later, Navy SEALs showed up. But the real miracle wasn't the rescue. It was the redemption that followed. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a fist. Sometimes it's simply the willingness to believe that even the worst person can become their best self if someone is brave enough to show them the way.